Marcus Thompson stepped off the luxury tour bus with an air of superiority that could be felt from miles away. The 35-year-old American businessman had money, and he made sure everyone knew it. His expensive Italian leather shoes clicked against the cobblestones as he adjusted his designer sunglasses and checked his gold Rolex watch. Finally, "We're here," he muttered to his travel companion Sarah, who was already embarrassed by his loud complaints during the entire bus ride. "I paid $15,000 for this European tour, and they better make it worth my time." The group had arrived at Buckingham Palace, one of London's most iconic landmarks. The tour guide, a patient woman named Emma, began explaining the history and traditions of the royal residence. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was too busy taking selfies and making loud phone calls about his latest business deals. "The guards you see here are not just for show," Emma explained to the group of 20 tourists. "They are active soldiers with real responsibilities. The red-coated guards are part of the Queen's Guard, and they take their duty very seriously. Please maintain a respectful distance and remember that touching them or interfering with their duties is strictly forbidden." Marcus rolled his eyes and whispered loud enough for others to hear, "These people in costumes think they're so important. Back in Texas, my security team could take these guys down in seconds." Several tourists around him shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to speak up against the wealthy American who had been bragging about his net worth all morning. The group moved closer to the palace gates where 2 imposing guards stood at attention. They wore the traditional red tunics, black trousers, and tall bearskin hats. Their faces remained completely expressionless as they performed their centuries-old duty of protecting the royal residence. These weren't actors or performers. They were highly trained soldiers from elite British regiments. Marcus pulled out his phone and started recording a video for his social media followers. "Look at this, guys," he said into the camera while walking dangerously close to one of the guards. "I'm here at Buckingham Palace, and these guys are just standing here like statues. Watch this, I bet they won't even move if I mess with them." Sarah grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. "Marcus, please don't. The tour guide said we shouldn't bother them." But Marcus shrugged her off with an annoyed expression. He was used to getting his way in everything, from business deals to personal relationships. In his mind, his wealth gave him the right to do whatever he wanted, wherever he went. The guard Marcus was approaching was James Fletcher, a 28-year-old soldier who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the prestigious Queen's Guard. James had been standing at his post for over an hour, maintaining perfect discipline despite the constant stream of tourists taking photos and making jokes. He was trained to ignore distractions and focus on his duty, but something about this particular tourist felt different, more threatening and disrespectful than usual. Marcus circled around James like a predator studying its prey, still recording with his phone. "Look how still he is," Marcus narrated to his camera. "I wonder what it would take to make him break." Other tourists began to gather, some pulling out their own phones to record what they sensed might become an interesting confrontation. The tension in the air was building as Marcus grew bolder with each passing moment. He had spent his entire life believing that money could buy him anything, including immunity from consequences. He had bribed his way out of legal troubles, bought his way into exclusive clubs, and used his wealth to intimidate anyone who dared to challenge him. "Sir, please step back," Emma the tour guide called out, but her voice was lost in the growing crowd of onlookers. Marcus was now standing just inches from James, close enough that the guard could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the arrogance that seemed to radiate from every pore of his body. James remained perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead, but inside he was calculating every possible threat and response. His military training had taught him to assess situations quickly and accurately. He could sense that this tourist was different from the usual harmless visitors who simply wanted photos and stories to share back home. Marcus's behavior grew more aggressive by the minute. He waved his hand inches from James's face, trying to get any kind of reaction. "Hello, anybody home in there?" he taunted while his phone continued recording everything. The crowd of tourists had grown larger, with some people looking uncomfortable while others seemed entertained by the unfolding drama. "Marcus, stop this right now," Sarah pleaded, her face red with embarrassment. She had known Marcus for 3 years, and while she was used to his arrogant behavior, this was crossing every line of decency. "You're making a complete fool of yourself, and you're going to get us all in trouble." But Marcus was too caught up in his performance to listen to reason. He thrived on attention and controversy, often posting outrageous content on his social media accounts to maintain his image as someone who lived by his own rules. His followers loved watching him push boundaries and challenge authority figures, which only encouraged his increasingly reckless behavior. "Watch this, everyone," Marcus announced loudly, making sure his phone captured every moment. "I'm going to prove that these so-called guards are nothing but actors in costumes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of cash, hundreds of dollars in crisp bills that he always carried, to show off his wealth. Emma, the tour guide, was frantically speaking into her radio, calling for security backup, but Palace security was already aware of the situation. Hidden cameras had been monitoring the incident from the moment Marcus first approached the guard post. Protocol dictated that guards should not break their stance unless there was a direct physical threat, but the situation was escalating rapidly. Marcus began waving the money in front of James's face. "Hey, soldier boy, I bet you don't make in a month what I spend on lunch. How about you break character for $100? Maybe do a little dance for my camera?" The insult cut deep as James came from a working-class family and had joined the military, partly for the steady income and benefits. James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his professional composure. He had dealt with difficult tourists before, but never someone this deliberately offensive and persistent. His training included psychological preparation for exactly these types of situations, where people would try to provoke guards into breaking their discipline. The crowd was now buzzing with nervous energy. Some tourists were backing away, sensing that the situation might turn dangerous, while others moved closer with their phones ready to capture whatever happened next. A few British tourists in the group looked genuinely angry at Marcus's disrespectful behavior toward their traditions and military personnel. "Come on, tin soldier," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "I know you can hear me. Nobody's really this disciplined. What's it going to take to make you move? More money? How about $500? That's probably more than your monthly salary, right?" Sarah made one final attempt to stop him. "Marcus, I'm leaving. This is disgusting behavior and I won't be part of it." She turned to walk away, but Marcus grabbed her arm roughly, causing her to stumble. "You're not going anywhere," he snapped, his mask of charm completely slipping away. "I paid for this trip and you're going to stay and watch me show these people who's really in charge here." The aggressive way he handled Sarah sent murmurs through the crowd, and several people began pulling out their phones to call for help. This was the moment that changed everything. James Fletcher was trained to protect not just the palace but also innocent civilians in the area. When he saw Marcus roughly grab the woman and prevent her from leaving, his military instincts kicked in. This was no longer just a case of tourist harassment. It had escalated to potential assault. James's eyes shifted slightly, making direct eye contact with Marcus for the first time. It was a subtle movement that most people would miss, but Marcus noticed immediately. There was something in that gaze that made his stomach clench with sudden unease. A cold, professional assessment that spoke of real danger rather than ceremonial duty. "Oh, now I've got your attention," Marcus said, but his voice lacked the confident swagger it had carried just moments before. Something in the guard's eyes had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. For the first time in the encounter, Marcus felt a flicker of doubt about his actions. The moment of eye contact had broken something in Marcus's confidence, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Instead of taking the warning for what it was, he interpreted James's reaction as a victory. "Finally! I knew you were just pretending to be a statue," he laughed, though the sound came out forced and nervous. Marcus decided to push even further. He had come too far to quit now, especially with dozens of people recording every moment. His social media reputation was built on never backing down from a challenge, and he couldn't afford to look weak in front of his audience. "Since you're actually paying attention now," Marcus said, stepping even closer to James, "let me tell you how things work in the real world. I'm a successful businessman worth more money than you'll see in your entire lifetime. I own 3 companies, 2 houses, and a yacht that costs more than this entire palace probably does." The crowd had grown to over 50 people now, with tourists from other tour groups being drawn to the commotion. Palace security personnel were moving into position around the perimeter, but they were following protocol by allowing the guards to handle the situation first. Hidden speakers crackled with quiet radio communications as the incident was being monitored from multiple security stations. James remained at attention, but every muscle in his body was coiled and ready for action. His years of military experience had taught him to recognize the escalation patterns of aggressive individuals. Marcus was following a textbook progression from verbal harassment to physical intimidation, and James knew exactly what was likely to come next. "You know what I think?" Marcus continued, his voice getting louder and more belligerent. "I think you guards are all just failed soldiers who couldn't cut it in real combat. So they dress you up like toy soldiers and make you stand here for tourists to laugh at. It's basically a joke job for people who couldn't make it in the real military." This insult struck particularly deep because James had actually seen real combat in Afghanistan, where he had saved 3 fellow soldiers during an insurgent attack. His chest bore scars from shrapnel wounds, hidden beneath his red tunic. The medal for valor that he had earned sat in a frame in his small London apartment, a reminder of the day he had risked his own life to protect others. Sarah had managed to break free from Marcus's grip and was now standing 20 feet away, tears streaming down her face. She was frantically typing on her phone, trying to find contact information for the American embassy. She knew that Marcus's behavior was about to have serious consequences, and she wanted no part of it. "Look at him." Marcus addressed the crowd like a ringmaster in a circus, standing there in his little red costume, pretending to be important. "I bet he's never even been in a real fight in his life. These ceremonial guards are probably just actors hired to look pretty for the tourists." Several British tourists in the crowd had heard enough. An elderly gentleman named William Harris, who had served in the Royal Navy during the Falklands War, stepped forward. "Young man, you need to stop this immediately. You're disrespecting not just this soldier, but everyone who has ever served their country." Marcus whirled around to face the older man. "Mind your own business, Grandpa. Nobody asked for your opinion. This is between me and Costume Boy here." His dismissive tone and crude language sent another wave of anger through the British tourists, who began muttering among themselves about calling the police. The situation was spiraling completely out of control, but Marcus was too intoxicated by his own arrogance to recognize the danger. He had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who either feared his wealth or wanted something from him. He had never encountered a situation where money and intimidation wouldn't eventually get him his way. "You want to see something really funny?" Marcus announced to his phone camera. "Watch what happens when I touch the untouchable royal guard." He extended his finger toward James's chest, moving slowly and deliberately to build suspense for his recording. This was the line that should never be crossed. Physical contact with a Queen's Guard while they were on duty was not just disrespectful. It was a criminal offense that could result in arrest and serious charges. More importantly, it represented a potential security threat that would trigger an immediate response from both the Guard and surrounding security personnel. James's training took over completely. Years of military discipline, combat experience, and specialized guard training had prepared him for exactly this moment. His body shifted slightly, imperceptibly to most observers, but Marcus was close enough to notice the change in the guard's posture. Marcus's finger was now just inches from James's chest when something in the guard's posture made him pause. For a brief moment, doubt crept into his mind, but the adrenaline and his need to maintain his image pushed him forward. He looked directly into his phone camera and said, "Here we go, folks. Time to see if this toy soldier is real or not." The moment Marcus's finger made contact with James's uniform, everything changed in an instant. James Fletcher's response was swift, professional, and absolutely devastating in its precision. Years of combat training and specialized guard protocol kicked in as he executed a textbook defensive maneuver that left Marcus sprawled on the cobblestones. In less than 2 seconds, the movement was so quick and efficient that many tourists missed exactly what happened. One moment Marcus was standing confidently with his finger extended, and the next he was lying on the ground with James standing over him, bayonet drawn and pointed directly at Marcus's throat. The transformation from ceremonial guard to combat soldier was so complete and intimidating that the entire crowd fell silent. "Nobody move," James commanded in a voice that carried absolute authority. His training had taught him to control situations immediately and completely, leaving no room for confusion or further escalation. The tourist who had been laughing and making jokes just seconds before was now trembling on the ground, finally understanding that he had made a terrible mistake. Marcus's phone had gone flying when he hit the cobblestones, landing several feet away with the camera still recording. The device captured his face as the reality of his situation sank in. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by genuine fear and confusion. His expensive sunglasses lay broken beside him, and his perfectly styled hair was now disheveled and dusty. "Don't move. Don't speak and don't reach for anything," James continued, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable threat. "Palace security is already en route, and any sudden movements will be considered a continued threat to royal security." The other Queen's Guard, who had been positioned nearby, had also snapped into action, creating a security perimeter around the incident. Their ceremonial bearing had transformed into combat readiness, and suddenly the tourists could see these men for what they really were: highly trained soldiers capable of neutralizing threats with lethal efficiency. Sarah was crying openly now, covering her mouth in horror at what she was witnessing. She had tried to warn Marcus multiple times, but he had been too arrogant to listen. Now she watched as the man she had been traveling with faced the consequences of his actions in the most dramatic way possible. Emma, the tour guide, was speaking rapidly into her radio, coordinating with palace security and trying to manage the crowd of shocked tourists. Many people were still recording with their phones, but now they were capturing Marcus's humiliation rather than his intended moment of triumph. The videos that would later surface on social media would tell a very different story than the one he had planned to share. "Please, I didn't mean anything," Marcus whispered from the ground, his voice barely audible. The confident businessman who had been bragging about his wealth and power just minutes earlier had been reduced to a frightened man, begging for mercy from someone he had just insulted and assaulted. "Sir, you are being detained for assault on a member of Her Majesty's forces and interference with royal security," James stated formally. "You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say may be used in evidence against you. You will be held until police arrive to process you for criminal charges." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Criminal charges meant courts, lawyers, legal fees, and potentially jail time. Even worse for someone of his social status, it meant public humiliation and damage to his business reputation. The videos of this incident would follow him for years, destroying the carefully crafted image of success and dominance that he had spent decades building. Palace security officers were now surrounding the area, their presence making it clear that this was no longer a tourist incident, but a serious security matter. They moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring that the scene was secured and that Marcus posed no further threat to anyone in the area. I'm sorry, Marcus began repeating, his voice growing more desperate as the reality of his situation became clear. "I didn't know, I was just joking around. Please, I'll do anything to make this right." The palace security officers arrived within minutes, moving with military precision that reminded everyone present that this was one of the most secure locations in the world. Chief Security Officer David Morrison, a former Special Air Service operative, took control of the situation immediately. His mere presence seemed to make the air itself feel heavier with authority. "Stand down." "Guardsman Fletcher," Morrison commanded, and James smoothly withdrew his bayonet while maintaining his position over Marcus. The professionalism of the exchange showed just how well-trained and coordinated the palace security team really was. Every movement was calculated and precise, leaving no room for error or confusion. Marcus remained flat on his back, afraid to move even slightly. His expensive suit was now dirty and wrinkled, and a small cut on his cheek where he had hit the cobblestones was beginning to bleed. The man who had strutted around just minutes earlier bragging about his wealth and power now looked pathetic and broken. "Please," Marcus whimpered, looking up at Morrison with desperate eyes. "I'm an American citizen. I have rights. I was just taking pictures like every other tourist. This is all a big misunderstanding." His voice cracked as he spoke, and tears were beginning to form in his eyes. Morrison looked down at Marcus with the expression of someone who had seen every type of troublemaker and criminal during his years in security work. "Mr. Thompson," he said, somehow already knowing Marcus's name, "you assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard while they were performing their duties. This is not a misunderstanding. It's a serious criminal offense that carries significant penalties under British law." The fact that Morrison knew his name sent a chill down Marcus's spine. It meant that security had been monitoring the situation for longer than he realized, and probably had detailed information about him already. His arrogance had blinded him to the fact that Buckingham Palace was one of the most surveilled places on Earth. "I can pay," Marcus said desperately, reaching toward his pocket where he kept his money. I have cash, I have credit cards. I can make a donation to charity, to the royal family, anything you want. Just please don't arrest me. Morrison's expression darkened. Sir, you are now attempting to bribe British security officers in addition to your other offenses. I strongly advise you to stop talking. Immediately. The warning came with such quiet authority that Marcus's mouth snapped shut automatically. 2. Uniformed Metropolitan Police officers had arrived and were speaking quietly with Morrison while keeping their eyes on Marcus. The sight of actual police officers made everything feel even more real and terrifying. This wasn't going to be resolved with money or apologies. Marcus was facing the full weight of British law enforcement. Sarah approached one of the police officers, her hands shaking as she tried to explain. Officers, I'm traveling with him, but I tried to stop him. I told him repeatedly not to bother the guards. I have it all recorded on my phone if you need evidence that I tried to intervene. The crowd of tourists had been moved back to a safe distance, but many were still recording with their phones. Marcus could hear whispered conversations in multiple languages as people discussed what they had just witnessed. The humiliation was almost worse than the legal consequences. He knew these videos would be shared around the world within hours. Mr. Thompson, one of the police officers said formally, you are under arrest for assault, interference with royal security, and attempted bribery of public officials. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. The formal reading of his rights hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had never been arrested before in his life, despite several close calls involving business deals of questionable legality. His lawyers had always managed to keep him out of serious trouble. But this was happening in a foreign country where his usual connections and influence meant nothing. Wait, Marcus pleaded as the officers moved to handcuff him. I want to call the American embassy. I want to call my lawyer. You can't do this to an American citizen without proper representation. You will have the opportunity to contact your embassy and legal representation once you're processed at the station. The officer replied calmly, right now, you need to comply with lawful arrest procedures. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marcus felt his world collapsing around him. The metal was cold against his wrists, and the reality of being physically restrained made his situation undeniably real. There would be no talking his way out of this, no using his wealth to make the problem disappear. The police van that arrived to transport Marcus was marked with the insignia of the Metropolitan Police, making it clear to everyone watching that this was a serious arrest rather than a simple detention. As the officers helped him to his feet and guided him toward the vehicle, Marcus's legs felt weak and unsteady. The adrenaline that had fueled his arrogant behavior was now working against him, making him shake with fear and anxiety. Please, officer, Marcus begged as they walked, his voice barely above a whisper. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I have 3 employees back home who depend on me. I have a mother in a nursing home who needs my support. You can't destroy my life over one stupid moment. The officer remained professional but unmoved. Sir, you had multiple opportunities to stop your behavior when warned by your tour guide and fellow tourists. You chose to escalate the situation and physically assault a member of the armed forces. The consequences of your actions are not our responsibility. As Marcus was placed in the back of the police van, he caught sight of Sarah standing with the tour group. She was crying and shaking her head, clearly devastated by what had happened. When their eyes met briefly, she turned away, unable to look at the man who had just destroyed not only his own life but potentially hers as well, since she would now be a witness in an international legal case. The van door closed with a metallic clang that seemed to echo in Marcus's chest. Through the small window, he could see the crowd of tourists still gathered around the palace gates. Many were still recording with their phones, and he realized with growing horror that videos of his humiliation were probably already being uploaded to social media platforms around the world. During the drive to the police station, Marcus tried to process what had just happened. Just 2 hours earlier, he had been a successful businessman on vacation, bragging about his wealth and enjoying the power that came with it. Now he was handcuffed in the back of a police van, facing criminal charges in a foreign country, with his reputation and business empire potentially in ruins. His phone, which had been recording his intended moment of triumph, had been confiscated as evidence. The device contained not just the video of his assault on the guard, but also his own recorded confession of his intentions and his insulting comments about British military personnel. His own arrogance had provided prosecutors with perfect evidence of his guilt and his state of mind during the incident. At the police station, Marcus was processed with the same efficiency and professionalism that characterized everything about British law enforcement. His fingerprints were taken, photographs were captured from multiple angles, and his personal belongings were catalogued and stored. The expensive watch, designer clothes, and thick roll of cash that had been symbols of his success were now just items in plastic evidence bags. "I want to call my lawyer," Marcus said repeatedly during the processing. But he was informed that international calls would be arranged after the initial paperwork was completed. The reality was that his high-powered American attorney would have no jurisdiction in British courts, and he would need to hire local legal representation. At considerable expense, the holding cell where Marcus was placed was clean but stark, a far cry from the luxury hotels and first-class accommodations he was used to. The reality of his situation hit him fully as he sat alone on the hard bench, still wearing his dirty and torn designer suit. For the first time in his adult life, his money and connections couldn't protect him from the consequences of his actions. News of the incident was already spreading beyond the immediate tourist crowd. Someone had uploaded the video to social media within minutes of the arrest, and it was being shared rapidly across platforms. The hashtag #ArrogantTouristKicked was beginning to trend, and news outlets were starting to pick up the story of the wealthy American businessman who had assaulted a royal guard. Back at Buckingham Palace, James Fletcher had returned to his post after giving his statement to investigators. His professionalism throughout the incident had been exemplary, and his commanding officers were proud of how he had handled a difficult and potentially dangerous situation. The other guards resumed their ceremonial duties, but the atmosphere remained tense as additional security measures were quietly implemented. Sarah was being interviewed by investigators as a witness to the incident. Her testimony would be crucial in establishing the timeline of events and Marcus's state of mind throughout the confrontation. She provided copies of the video she had taken while trying to document Marcus's behavior in case she needed evidence of her attempts to stop him. 3 hours after his arrest, Marcus was finally allowed to make his phone calls. His hands shook as he dialed his lawyer's number in Texas, knowing that the conversation would be one of the most difficult of his life. When his attorney answered, Marcus could barely speak through his tears and panic. "John, it's Marcus. I'm in serious trouble. I'm in jail in London and I need help immediately." His voice cracked as he tried to explain the situation, but the words came out in a jumbled, incoherent rush of panic and desperation. His lawyer, John Harrison, had represented Marcus for over 10 years and was used to his client's arrogant behavior. But as Marcus described what had happened at Buckingham Palace, even Harrison was shocked by the severity of the situation. Assault on a royal guard was not a minor tourist infraction. It was a serious criminal offense that could result in significant jail time. "Marcus, you need to understand something," Harrison said grimly. "I can't practice law in the UK. You're going to need a British barrister, and given the nature of the charges and the international attention this is likely to receive, you're looking at legal fees in the hundreds of thousands of dollars." The mention of legal fees would normally have been a minor concern for someone of Marcus's wealth, but he was beginning to realize that money alone wouldn't solve this problem. British courts were known for their independence and their refusal to be influenced by wealth or celebrity status. He would be judged on his actions, not his bank account. By the time Marcus was released on bail 12 hours later, the story had exploded across international media. News outlets around the world were covering the incident, with headlines like "Wealthy American Tourist Assaults Royal," "Guard an Arrogant Businessman Humiliated at Buckingham Palace." The videos of his arrest were being played on television networks and shared millions of times on social media. His business empire was already feeling the effects of the scandal. Clients were canceling contracts, partners were distancing themselves from his companies, and his stock holdings were dropping rapidly as investors fled anything associated with his name. The reputation he had spent decades building was crumbling in real time as the world watched his humiliation unfold. Sarah had flown back to the United States immediately after giving her statement to police, wanting nothing more to do with Marcus or the situation he had created. Before leaving, She had recorded a video statement explaining her perspective on the events, making it clear that she had tried repeatedly to stop Marcus's behavior and that she was horrified by his actions. Marcus hired the best British legal team his money could buy, but even they warned him that the case would be difficult to defend. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Multiple video recordings, dozens of witnesses, and his own recorded statements proving his intent and state of mind. The best they could hope for was to minimize the sentence and try to limit the long-term consequences. The court proceedings became a media sensation, with journalists and photographers following every development. Marcus had to endure the humiliation of having his own words played back in court, including his boastful claims about his wealth and his insulting comments about British military personnel. The judge showed no sympathy for his tearful apologies and pleas for mercy. In the end, Marcus was sentenced to 6 months in prison, followed by 2 years of probation and a lifetime ban from all royal properties. He was also ordered to pay substantial fines and court costs, though the financial penalty was insignificant. Compared to the damage to his reputation and business interests, the incident became a cautionary tale that was studied in business schools and shared widely as an example of how arrogance and disrespect for other cultures could lead to devastating consequences. Marcus Thompson, who had once bragged about his wealth and power, became known worldwide as the foolish tourist who kicked a royal guard and lost everything in the process. Years later, after serving his sentence and returning to the United States, Marcus lived quietly in a small apartment, his business empire destroyed and his savings depleted by legal fees and settlements. He had learned too late that respect and humility were more valuable than all the money in the world. The few minutes of arrogant behavior at Buckingham Palace had cost him everything he had spent his lifetime building, serving as a permanent reminder that actions have consequences, regardless of wealth or status.